All right, so my sermon today is called Iron Sharpens Iron. And I want you to think about who are the most influential people in your life. Could you name who they are? Who would they be? Maybe if someone wants to just call out. Sorry? A partner, okay, so yep, if you have a boyfriend, girlfriend maybe, or husband, wife, they can be quite influential. Okay, so you got some friends? Yep. Anyone else can name some influential people? Okay. So your youth group, right? Okay. Cool, so there's some good ideas that you have shared. So in the media, they have a list of people that they call are the most influential people. And I don't know if you've seen in Time magazine, they have their top 100 most influential people, and also this book by Michael Hart, and that's called the 100, a ranking of the most influential people in history. So if you can see those pictures, I don't know if you can recognize the people on them, but I was looking at these pictures and I thought, I don't really know much of who these people are. So for me personally, I don't know if these people would have had much influence in my life. So I don't know about you, but for me, not so much. I guess people who influence us, they're usually people who are close to us. And as you mentioned, they were family or friends or like a youth group, people that you spend a lot of time with. So I wanted to talk about that this morning and bring it into our story today. So the people who surround us, they are the ones who usually influence us. They influence our behavior, our attitudes, and they can kind of help us change the way we think, what we do, what we say and become. And I want to share this quote. It's by Jim Rohn, who is a famous motivational speaker. And this is what he says: that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you think about this, it could be true to a degree. It's not necessarily like completely that's the only thing that influences you. But to a degree, people around us, they influence us, of the people that we become. So this just highlights the importance of thinking about who we surround ourselves with. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today, that people who surround us, they can either influence us for good or for evil. And it says in the Bible in Proverbs 27, verse 17, that as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. So this means that when we interact with each other, that can shape and change the other person. And it's not written in a way that's meant to be negative. It's actually written in a positive sense, where it means that we help each other to become better. So for iron, it needs iron to sharpen it. It can't be sharpened by another material. Maybe wood would not help the iron to be sharpened. And so this is just means that the quality of the friendship, it needs to be similar. And it's kind of saying, if you want good friends, that you also need to be a good friend. So I want to talk about this in the story of Daniel. So here we have Daniel and his 3 friends, and they found strength to not compromise their belief in God because they were surrounded by a pagan nation and temptation, but they had this same desire to honor God. So we're going to look at that story today, how Daniel especially was influencing his friends and how his example made a difference in the lives of his friends. So if you want to open your Bible, we're looking at Daniel chapter 1 this morning. And in Daniel chapter 1, it's the story about how they abstain from the king's delicacies. And when they did this, it made them appear healthier than the others who were attending to the king. But I want to see today that there is more to this story than just a health message. And it's also a story about how iron sharpens iron. And this was through the influence of Daniel towards his friends. So in this chapter, we have the story of this young Jewish man. And it's Daniel. He's taken captive to go to Babylon. And at the time, the Babylonians, they had captured the city of Jerusalem, which was Daniel's hometown. And they took the people there and they took them as prisoners to go to Babylon. So they were just forced out of their land. They were taken to one of the most wicked cities of the then known world. And all around them was evil everywhere and widespread worship of pagan gods. So they journeyed to Babylon, and that journey was about 1,000 kilometers. They were taken as captives, which meant that all their rights were taken away. They were stripped of their belongings. They were stripped of their history, of their culture, and their religion. And that really meant that their identity was being taken from them. So we're going to read Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to 7, just to look at our story. So if you want to read along with me this morning. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them. So at the end of that time, they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. So here, Daniel and his friends, they were chosen by Ashpenaz. And it was because they were good-looking, they had wisdom, and they were very gifted as well. So King Nebuchadnezzar, he was really intentional in choosing these young men. And that's because he wanted the best of Israel, and he wanted to re-identify them as Babylonians. So we see there that Daniel and his friends, their names were changed. And that was to take away the references to God that was in their Jewish names. And then they were taught in the Babylonian schools and indoctrinated in their ways. And then they were also given the king's delicacies, and that was especially to honor these Jewish young men. And the reason why the king would do this was to make them leave behind their Hebrew God and their culture. King Nebuchadnezzar wanted these young men to follow him, but Daniel and his friends, they couldn't be influenced by all the allurements and temptations that were before them, and they stayed loyal to Jehovah. So we see that the Babylonians, they were trying everything to take their identity away from these Jewish captives. But what they couldn't do was remove the power of influence in the lives of these young Jewish men. And we see that Daniel especially had influence over his friends. And if you think about this, there were multiple opportunities for them to give away their faith. But they remained faithful and courageous, and they didn't compromise when their faith was put to the test. And I just wanted to share some of these verses, if you read them or just look at them, that you will notice that Daniel's name is usually mentioned first. So there's some of the verses just on the screen. So that really means that he is one of the leaders of this group of young men. And he's also the spokesman on behalf of his friends as well. And we see that Daniel in verse 10, that he is actually questioned about refusing the king's food. And then Daniel, he answers and he speaks for himself and his friends. So let's read Daniel chapter 1, verses 8. It says, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief and the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So when it says purposed in his heart, that word, it just means that he determined, or that he committed, he made a decision, and he made an intentional choice not to eat the king's food. But when we read that verse, it doesn't mention the other three friends. But then we find out later that actually all of them decided not to defile themselves in this way. So if we keep reading in verse 15, it says, At the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. So Daniel's friends, they were looking to him as an example, and they were watching what he did. And because of that, they found courage to follow his lead and to also honor God. They saw in him a leader who influenced the choices that they made. And if you think about Daniel, if he was to give in to the king's offer of eating these delicacies, maybe that influence could have influenced his friends to also do the same thing and give in to temptation. So the people that we surround ourselves with, either knowingly or unknowingly, they impact the choices we make. And just like Daniel and his three friends, their decision-making was dependent to an extent on the positive influence of Daniel. And this is why I want to share with you this morning how important it is to choose people who can influence us to honor God. So what does it look like to have positive influences in our lives? And maybe that's a question that you can think about. Who are the people that surround you, and how do they influence you with your decisions that you make? And I think at the end of the day, we want to have people around us who will encourage us and who will lead us closer in our walk with Jesus. And how do these people, how do they bring out good qualities in you? So as you know, I've just moved back to Australia. I was in New Zealand for 4 years. And I moved there in 2020, which was 2 weeks before the first lockdown of COVID. So I was placed in a church called Tauranga, which is southeast of Auckland, and I didn't know anyone. I knew a few people in New Zealand. They were all kind of spread out, but there was no one I knew in this town that I was going to live in. And I had a family reach out to me and say, oh, you can stay with us while you sort out your accommodation and find a place to stay. And so I went to live with them, and we ended up doing lockdown together for 2 months. And this is a family that I've only just met. And so I stayed at their house, and I got to know their family. And the girl who I was staying with, we became really good friends, and most nights we would talk together. We'd talk about life, we'd talk about God. And as we were talking, she started to share with me this vision that she had to start a performing arts ministry. So her background, she works as a director of school musicals, and she teaches them, and she really had on her heart this desire to start a ministry with what she does. And so as we were talking in her living room on that night, I just said, well, why don't we pray about this? And that's what we did. We prayed, and we committed this vision to God. And then we saw over the next few months that doors kept opening for us to start different ministries. So one of them was to start a weekly ministry with the kids from her musicals. She invited them to come to church, and then we would talk about God and use performing arts as a way to share Jesus. And then she had another idea to start a 2-day holiday program. So we did this for 2 days. The kids sing and dance, and we do it on a theme about God. And then we invite all the parents to come and to watch the kids perform on the last night. So we did this, since 2020. And the first time we ran it in 2020, this was our church. So that was the seminar room. It was filled with all these kids from our community, and they all performed for their parents. So we had about 300 people in our church. It was packed to the brim. And these are all people who don't probably have Christian background or even Adventist. But yeah, our church was filled with people from our community. And yeah, the kids were evangelists. They were sharing God to their parents and friends. So by last year, we have done this every year, and we ran the weekly ministry just in between lockdowns. But last year, we noticed that the kids, the numbers were kind of going down, and we were just trying to figure out what was going on, because we didn't understand why we were losing these children. And by, I think it was around June, the numbers were so low that we couldn't actually keep running the ministry. And we were at a point where we were thinking, do we give up? Do we just let it die? And we decided at that time that we would commit 40 days of prayer to this ministry. And we had quite a long list of prayer requests, and we were praying through all these prayers for those 40 days. And one of them was to revive this ministry. So at the end of the 40 days, we had that following week, a few more kids came, so it was about 5. And then the next week it doubled, and it just kept growing. And before we knew it, we had now around 30 to 40 kids coming back to this ministry. And also at that time, I was praying about God's leading, and that's when Jeremy reached out to me. And that was when the door opened to come to Geelong as well. So that was also during the 40 days of prayer. So it was really a powerful time for us, and we saw God's hand on us and how he was opening doors and answering prayers for us. And I learned during that time that this ministry was a gift from God. And for us as leaders, that we kind of lost our focus. And we were running it on our own strength and ability. And we lost sight of our dependence on God. And as we were praying during that time, God was giving us ideas of how we could just change it up a bit and how we could reach the kids better. And one of them was just to get the kids to act out the Bible stories, and they could learn as they were engaged with all their senses to tell these Bible stories. And since then, God has opened so many doors for us. And the ministry just kept expanding. And during that time of prayer, actually, we had another opportunity open where we could create a musical for the North New Zealand Conference Pathfinder Camporee. And that was on the story of Abraham. So Patrice, my friend, she asked me, could you write this script and write songs for this musical? And I mean, I've never written a musical in my life, but God opened this door, and she really encouraged me to do it. She was just helping me along, and with her and the help of a few other people, we were able to create this musical for the Camporee. And since then, she's also been approached by some schools in Auckland to teach this musical to the high school with the students over there. So these are just some ways that God opened doors, and he led us as we came together and as we sought God, and he just kept leading us and opening doors for this ministry. And we never thought that time in 2020 when we were praying in her living room, and we had just no idea what God had in store for us. And we still see God pouring out his blessing on this ministry, where kids can be reached for Jesus. And what we had throughout that whole time, we had each other's friendship. And if we look back on how God led us, there were many times where there were a lot of dark times as well. And the enemy really tried to stop what God was doing. He tried to discourage us many times. But we had each other through this friendship, and we helped each other move forward despite the setbacks that we faced. And I think of this for us as Christians, that we can't journey alone in our walk with God, that we need each other for encouragement and support along this journey in life. And for us as Christians, it's not something we can do to have faith all by ourselves. And some people say, well, maybe all I need is just a personal relationship with Jesus. That's all I need. I don't need church. I don't need other people. But God designed us to be social beings. And he designed us to live in community, to encourage each other, to build each other up. And if you think about Christianity, if it's like a race, we are running this race together, and it's not to beat each other or try to beat the other person, but we're all running to try to win this race together. And that's why we need the support of each other. And God knows that you can't live your faith out all by yourself, and that you need to surround yourself with people who will encourage you, and who will encourage you along the right path. I'll just share this verse in Hebrews 10, verse 25. And it says, not giving up meeting together, as some of you are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, all the more as you see the day approaching. So as we draw nearer to the coming of Christ, the Bible encourages us to draw nearer to each other and to help each other, to support each other in our Christian walk. And this is what Daniel did with his friends. When they faced temptation, they came together. They supported each other as they made this decision to honor God. And they helped each other to remain faithful in this trying time. And for us, we are encouraged to support each other as well, so that we can remain faithful in that time as we approach the return of Christ. So I want to leave you with a question this morning. And that question is, who is surrounding you? And what influence do they have in your life? So that's one. And then the second is to think about your own influence. Are you a building block for someone else's faith? Or are you a stumbling block that's hindering someone's walk with God? If we think of our church, it's not just a building, but we are a body of believers. And we exist to edify, to equip, and to encourage one another in this Christian race. So my challenge for you is to think about how you can encourage someone in their walk with Christ, because you have the power to influence someone for good, and to also consider one another to stir up love and good works, as it says in Hebrews 10:24. So this is my prayer this morning for each of us, that we can be encouragers, that we can influence each other for good. And by grace, by God's grace, may that be our experience. Amen.